I'm glad you mentioned artificial sweetener because I wanted to make sure and ask you about sugar. I know this is a big plank in your platform. So talk about sugar and why this is a big part of reading labels too. I feel like people get confused by nutrition labels, but it really is easy to look at a nutrition label in this country and figure out how much sugar is in something.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit. So, nutrition labels, the food companies love the concept of calories.
Yeah.
Because we're always like, oh, this is lower calorie, it must be better for me.
Yeah.
Well, not all calories are created equal. Calorie is not a calorie. A calorie of Twinkie is not interchangeable with a calorie of broccoli. And so we need to, I don't care what the calorie content of a food is. What I care about is, are we adding all these ingredients to the food? So when I look at a label, first thing I look at is how much added sugar is in that food.
Yeah.
Why are we adding sugar to crackers?
Yeah.
Why are we adding sugar to, all these ingredients, all the cookies, well, cookies and pies are sweet.
Well, and a lot of things in which you would never expect to see it. Like you mentioned, the packaged vegetable, like the steamers things. And when I really started measuring my sugar intake and reading, going blind in the grocery store, reading labels, I was like, oh my gosh, why is there all this added sugar in this steamable pouch of what I think should be healthy?
Because people love sweet. And so that's an evolutionary adaptation. We were hardwired to love sweets because when we were hunter-gatherers and we didn't have 7-Elevens and Casey's and all of that, we actually needed sweets in the fall to begin to put on fat for the winter. So there's an evolutionary switch. And there's been a couple books written about this, but what happens is when we eat sweets, we tend to increase uric acid, which helps us store fat.
Okay.
And so, again, a survival advantage. In this, when do berries ripen? When does fruit ripen in the northern hemisphere? Well, it ripens in the fall, just before winter when we don't have as much food available to us. So that helps us put on fat. Look at hibernating animals, bears. They go crazy right now trying to find berries because they got to put on fat before winter. So there actually is a survival advantage to have that craving for sweets. So they found it in berries and honey and things like that. We still have that. The food industry takes advantage of that. Everything is sweet. When you get off of sweets, you realize how sweet our food system is.
Yeah, you do.
And so the important part of reading labels is not the amount of total sugar, because there's many things in our food system that are perfectly fine that have natural sugar in it. It's the added sugar. One of my biggest go-tos for helping people, yogurt.
Oh, yeah.
You get a little carton, a 3.5 ounce carton of yogurt, and it'll have 12 grams of sugar.
Yeah.
So let's put that in context. How much is 12 grams of sugar? That's 3 teaspoons.
Yeah, that's a lot.
3 teaspoons. The World Health Organization came out a number of years ago with a recommendation for total added sugars per day, 6 teaspoons.
Yeah.
So you eat a yogurt, you're already halfway there. You drink a glass of orange juice, you've now had 3 days
Boom,
worth.
you're over the top.
So that's one of the problems. But it's also how is the sugar put into the food and what other chemicals are in that food that's also causing problems.
Right. But if I'm eating something that has that much added sugar in it, it probably has all that other crap in it too.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. The condiments.
Oh yeah.
Barbecue sauce.
Ton of sugar.
So barbecue sauce, you grab a barbecue sauce and a typical serving is 2 tablespoons. 16 grams of sugar.
Wow.
4 teaspoons of sugar in 2 tablespoons of barbecue sauce. And by the time you're done eating the barbecue, you've probably had more than 2 tablespoons.
Okay, so let's distill this down a little bit more for people. You've established that too much sugar, we're going to pile on fat. Everybody understands that that is bad. But what else do we know about what sugar does to our body? Added sugar.
So, it disrupts our metabolic system. It increases our, basically sugar, if there's too much of it, results in production of fat in our liver. So that fat is produced by our liver because our liver doesn't know what else to do with the fructose molecule in sugar. It then exports it to our body and here we are. you know, there's some controversy about what does sugar do to our brain. There's the whole theory of too much sugar, ADHD. Not sure there's a direct correlation there, but certainly we have to be cognizant of our kids, because our kids' brains are different than our adult brains.
Yeah.
They're growing,
Yeah.
okay? They're dividing. We're growing new brain cells. We're making new synapses, and we're feeding our brains junk. Our brains need fat, particularly omega-3 fats from fatty fish.
Yep.
Our brains need protein. Our brains don't need this massive load of sugar and carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So there's certainly some concern about the developing brain and what we're feeding our kids, particularly all the substances in ultra-processed food that we really don't know what it's doing.
Yeah. How about with regard to cognitive decline and, you know, things like dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's? How can we eat to protect ourselves against those things?
So, you know, all of those have a very common theme, and it's really about our neurons, our nerve cells in our brain are not producing the energy that they need to. So Alzheimer's has also been called by many people type 3 diabetes because of the tight correlation between the development of Alzheimer's and dysregulated blood sugar.
Okay.
80% of people with Alzheimer's have diabetes or have dysregulated blood sugar.
Interesting.
And what happens is when we can't get that glucose from our bloodstream into our cells can't produce the energy they need to maintain their function. And so Dr. Dale Bredesen, he's out at UCLA, and he's done a lot of work on looking at how can we slow or reverse cognitive decline before it becomes Alzheimer's. And he's put together a program that includes how do we eat? Well, there's no sugar in his diet. There's no ultra-processed foods in his diet. How do we move? One of the most potent stimulators of improving the connections, what we call synapses in the brain, is exercise.
Yay.
And
Yeah.
what happens is we produce something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that goes to our brain and stimulates more neural connections. So one of the best things we can do for our brain, move and move some more. And so that's part of this program. Staying cognitively active. You know, there's not a game or puzzle that's going to make you not have Alzheimer's, but it's staying engaged in life.
Yeah.
Staying engaged in the social context of life, staying engaged in the intellectual content of life. Might be crossword puzzles, might be Sudokus, might be chess, whatever it is. Retrain your brain, you know. I have a really weak right side of my brain because I don't have any artistic capability whatsoever. And I probably ought to be learning a musical instrument or something. And I tried.
Painting, yeah,
Yeah,
something like
something
that.
like that.